Good evening and good evening from London. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here again with another live stream. And tonight I'm going to be speaking about the provocation of the Fatherland Liberation War, which is referred to as the Korean War in the West. But it was not actually a war between Koreans, it was actually a war between the US imperialists and the Korean people. But before I start talking about that, I will address a few remarks about some current issues. And I think everybody would have seen in the news the visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin to People's Korea, which happened on Tuesday. And I think this was a very important event. Certainly is a new milestone in the history of relations between People's Korea and the Russian Federation, which is an anti-imperialist state. No one is pretending that the Russian Federation is a socialist country. I think people need to not have illusions about the Russian Federation being a socialist country. However, it is an anti-imperialist state. It is a nationalist regime which is opposed to US imperialism. And I think it is very important that good relations should be cemented between anti-imperialist states. And of course, the DPRK has correctly given support to the Russian special military operation in the Ukraine against the Banderite fascist puppet regime in Kiev. It was a just defensive measure by the Russian Federation to stop NATO using the Ukraine as a bridgehead to invade Russia and to break up Russia. So Russia simply acted defensively, and moreover, you have the spectre of Nazism again in Europe. People thought that Nazism in Europe ended in 1945, but of course it's alive and well in the Ukraine under the corrupt Zelensky regime, which has revived fascism and Nazism and has the neo-Nazi Azov battalion. So the DPRK has done the correct thing in promoting good relations with its neighbor, the Russian Federation. And of course, the relationship between the DPRK and Russian Federation goes back a long way. It had relations with the former Soviet Union. And in fact, the relationship between the DPRK and the Russian Federation is on a new level, because no general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union ever visited People's Korea. That is a fact. However, President Putin has visited People's Korea twice. So I think that sort of fact is very significant and points to the development of good relations between the two countries. Both Russia and the DPRK stand together on the anti-imperialist front. And it was quite pleasing to watch the excellent welcome given to President Putin in Pyongyang. So I'm sure that relations between the Russian Federation and People's Korea will march on to ever greater heights. And just to address another current issue, before I go on to the subject of the Fatherland Liberation War, normally I wouldn't get involved in commenting on domestic policy or domestic politics or matters of domestic policy, or endorsing this party or that party. However, it's been pointed out that George Galloway has slandered the DPRK at an election rally. He said that he'd been to the DPRK and didn't like it and wouldn't bring it here. Well, Mr. Galloway was given excellent hospitality by the DPRK years ago, eating food given to him by for free by the Korean people. So these remarks show what a traitor he is. And Galloway is saying he wouldn't bring the DPRK to Britain, but when you look at the massive achievements of the DPRK, which I saw during my visit in April, you would say, yes, we need this here. Yes, we need a society without homeless people, without unemployment, without poverty, without drug addicts, without drug dealers, without prostitution, without pornography, without gang violence, and a society with free housing, free healthcare, full employment, taxes abolished. So why not bring it here? George Galloway is so wrong, and is showing his face as someone who supposedly is against the mainstream narrative, but seems to actually accept it. So anyway, that is my opinion of Galloway, because I know it will come up in the questions in the chat, which I will sort of take later. Now I'm just now going to speak about the Fatherland Liberation War. And I think this is obviously a very important topic. The reason why being because on June the 25th, it will be the 74th anniversary of the provocation of the war by the US imperialists and their South Korean puppets. And in a minute, I will explain the truth about how the war was started by the US imperialists. June 25th to July 27th is set as the month of solidarity with the Korean people, because June the 25th was the date that the war started, and July 27th was when US imperialism conceded its defeat by concluding an armistice without a victory. The US imperialists, the ringleader of world imperialism and international reactionaries, provoked a war in Korea on the 25th of June 1950 by instigating their South Korean puppets to attack the young Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The US imperialists were hungry for profits and conquests. The US imperialists fought an unjust war against the Korean people. The US imperialists had launched a war of conquest against the DPRK, a war to destroy the Juche-based People's Democratic System in the DPRK, as well as to destroy socialism, not only in Asia, but in the entire world. The Korean people, led by the great revolutionary leader and national hero, Marshal Kim Il-sung, a true military strategic genius, an ever victorious arm-wielded commander, fought a fierce anti-imperialist, anti-US struggle against US imperialism and the Allied forces of international reaction, which actually included British troops who had been sent by the British Labour government, a so-called socialist government. The war was a fierce class struggle against the enemies of the people. The Korean people fought a national liberation war against the Yankee imperialist invaders, a war of justice for independence and freedom, and also a war of reunification. The Fatherland Liberation War of the Korean people proved to be a crucible of the Songun idea. We condemn the appalling barbarity of the US imperialists during the Fatherland Liberation War. We denounce their crimes of massacring civilians and the use of biological and chemical weapons. 35,383 people were murdered by the US and class enemies such as landlords and former landlords and capitalists at Sinchon-ri, and 1,500 people were massacred at Susan-ri, just to give a few examples. And I myself have visited the Sinchon Museum many times, including several visits to the new Sinchon Museum, which serves not only as a memorial to those who were killed, but also as an anti-US class education center. The US imperialists have increased their threats to people's Korea and been carrying out numerous military exercises threatening the DPRK. The US imperialists and South Korean puppets are stepping up their war moves. Plus, the US is actually openly deploying strategic nuclear assets. A vigorous campaign should be launched for the withdrawal of US troops from South Korea, and we should wholeheartedly support the DPRK government and respected Marshal Kim Jong-un, who leads the struggle of People's Korea against US imperialism. So it's very important that we step up our solidarity with the Korean people against US imperialism. In this regard, we have an online anti-US meeting on the 25th of June, and we will also be picketing the Yankee embassy on the 29th of June. Now, for those who have read Western history books, I'm sure, people have had these rammed down their throat at school and university. I think it's important to refute the false narrative that they put forward about the Korean War or Fatherland Liberation War. The mainstream media and history books will falsely accuse the DPRK of starting the war, and even that it, quote unquote, invaded South Korea. No one actually stops to think whether you can actually invade your own country. I would say to people, think about it very closely. Can you invade your own country? I mean, for example, during the American Civil War, did anyone say that the Confederate side invaded the northern side? Or during the English Civil War, did people talk about the parliamentary side invading the royalist side. No, I don't think so somehow. As we know, the war broke out on the 25th of June 1950, some 74 years ago. However, it can be said that the war started much earlier, from 1947, when South Korea began making raids into the northern half of Korea. One could argue that the war actually began on the 8th of September 1945, when US troops landed in South Korea, or even in 1866, when the US sent its pirate ship, the General Sherman, up the River Taedong in Pyongyang to loot and pillage. The US, which had occupied South Korea in 1945 and created a puppet regime in South Korea, was dead against the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in September 1948. In those days, the US imperialists simply did not believe in the so-called containment of communism, but in rollback. That is actually rolling back revolutions and destroying socialist countries. John Foster Dulles, the US Secretary of State, was a well-known architect of this policy. Dulles had made a lot of money through dealings with the German Nazi Party in the 1930s. Dulles wrote a book called War or Peace, arguing for, quote unquote, liberating the socialist countries. He wrote, and I quote, "We should make it clear in Eastern Europe and Asia that we do not accept the status quo, and eventually liberation is an essential and enduring part of our foreign policy." End of quote. In other words, the aim of the US was to crush socialism by means of force, whether direct military force or other kinds of force. Internally, the US banned the Communist Party and unleashed a wave of anti-communist hysteria known as McCarthyism, in which even non-communist liberals, for example, certain Hollywood actors, were persecuted. In South Korea, the US established a puppet army under the control of a US military advisory group. The US armed and primed South Korea for a war against the DPRK. According to an official document released by the US Congress, they handed over more than 145 rifles, some 2,000 machine guns and submachine guns, over 200 pieces of various calibers, 4,900 odd vehicles, 79 warships, and others to the South Korean puppet army in 1949 alone. It is noticeable that the South Korean puppet navy was greatly expanded. The US imperialists deployed most of the South Korean puppet army on the front along the 38th parallel and perpetrated armed provocations against the DPRK. In 1949, the South Korean puppet army intruded into areas of the DPRK such as Mount Songgak, Mount Upna, and other areas, causing a lot of damage and casualties. The DPRK was attacked a total of 2,617 times. On the 26th of January 1950, the US concluded the US-South Korea Mutual Defense Treaty. On the 14th of April 1950, the then secret directive of the US National Security Council, Directive NSC 68, authorized the start of the Korean War. Dulles, who I mentioned earlier, the architect of the US rollback policy, actually visited South Korea in June 1950, just 1 week before the war started. It is impossible for this to have been a coincidence. Totally impossible. Dulles even inspected the front line along the 38th parallel, and a picture shows him looking at a map. Dulles said to the South Korean puppet army, and I quote, "No strong enemy whatever would stand against you, but I hope you will strive ever harder, because the day is not so far off when you will have to display your great might for its own sake." End of quotation. Addressing the South Korean Puppet National Assembly, Dulles said, and I quote, "You are not alone. You will never be alone, as long as you continue to play worthily your part in the great design for the freedom of human beings." End of quotation. This was a coded message to the South Korean puppets to start the war. After visiting South Korea, Dulles stopped off in Tokyo and met with General Bradley and General Douglas MacArthur, as well as US Defense Secretary Johnson. Again, this meeting cannot have been coincidental. On the 22nd of June, Dulles stated somewhat cryptically and enigmatically, I quote, "The United States will soon take some positive action." End of quotation. It was evident that the meeting was to finalize the provocation of the Korean War. The DPRK's population was only half of that of South Korea, so it would be absurd for it to try and initiate a war against South Korea. Moreover, on the day that the war broke out, it was pointed out by a British soldier in Korea, Julian Tunstall of the Middlesex Regiment, that, end quote, "the Ree Army had 6 fully equipped divisions sitting just below or quite close to the 38th parallel. So far, it can be judged that the Korean People's Army had 2 below combat strength divisions on or near the 38th parallel." End of quotation. On the 23rd of June, the South Korean puppet forces began an artillery bombardment of the areas north of the 38th parallel. On the early morning of the 25th of June, the South Korean forces, under the command of the American Military Advisory Group, started the attack on the DPRK. The 17th Regiment of the South Korean Puppet Army pushed forward in Tae-tan and Pyeokseong, and the 1st Infantry attacked in the Kaesong area. They intruded 12 kilometers into DPRK territory. The DPRK demanded they stop at once, but this was ignored, so the DPRK went over to the counter-offensive. It should be noted that the DPRK only launched a counter-offensive after warning South Korea to halt its attack. On the morning of the 25th of June, 1950, 650 US women and children were evacuated by the Norwegian ship Rheinford at 3 a.m. in the morning. US accounts put the war as starting at 6 a.m. So, how would the US know in advance to plan the evacuation of its nationals? The famous American journalist John Gunther wrote in his book, The Riddle of MacArthur, that a US staff officer in Tokyo on the 25th of June was called to the phone and came back and whispered, and I quote, "A big story has just broken. the South Koreans have attacked North Korea, end of quote. Choi Dok-sin, former South Korean army commander and the former South Korean foreign minister and ambassador, former South Korean ambassador to the UN, stated that he'd seen the secret order of Syngman Rhee to start the war. All the above facts show that it was not the DPRK that provoked or started the Fatherland Liberation War, but the South Korean puppets egged on by their Yankee overlords. So I will conclude there and start answering the comments in the chat. Just look at the comments in the chat or questions in the chat one by one. Right, okay, I'd start going through the yeah, I mean, just answering, I mean, there's a bit of a long thread about the Galloway comments. No, it's not a rumor. I've actually seen the footage of where he does that. And yeah, I'm sure there's people in the Workers' Party of Britain who are pro DPRK, but unfortunately, the leader of it, Mr. Galloway, is not pro DPRK, and in fact, has quite a long history of anti-communism, which we shouldn't forget. I was around a long time ago when Galloway, as director of War and Want, a charity, actually dissed former socialist Ethiopia. Good evening to our friends all in Turkey. Yes, it was the same Dulles behind the failed invasion of Cuba, and same Dulles who was behind the coup in Guatemala. Okay, if I have a few questions, I will do my best to answer them. Right, okay. I'm looking at so please go ahead and put some questions if you want to ask them, or some comments. Well, while you all think about questions that you'd like to put, or maybe a few comments, just talk about the fourth coming activities of KFA UK and the British Group for the Study of the Juche Deer. We have an online meeting tomorrow about a work by Comrade Kim Jong-il, which is about adhering to socialist principles in the revolution construction. On Tuesday, 25th of June, we've got an anti-US rally, and on the 29th of June, we are picketing the US Embassy. We need to set a date for our film night, which we will do soon. And hopefully in July, we will hold a real life meeting towards the end of July. Now we're seeing comments coming up. Well, to reply to George, I think you must have missed the start, because I did make a few comments about the visit of President Vladimir Putin to People's Korea. I think it was extremely successful. It was a victory for the Juche-based diplomacy of the DPRK, and is a very significant development in cementing relations of friendship and cooperation between the Russian Federation and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And whatever we may think of Russian internal policy, it is a fact that Russia is standing on the front against US imperialism, and it is, I think, natural that the two countries should develop close relations, and I think this will be very positive. This will be very positive for developing the world anti-imperialist movement. Yes, good comment from you, George. Yes, I'm sure the US imperialists are trembling about this. In fact, I've seen some comments in the the mainstream media, the bourgeois media, about a so-called new axis of tyranny being created. Yes, I agree. America is a tyranny. America is almost a fascist state. Okay, well, while people think up new questions or comments, just talk a bit more about the Sinchon Museum, as this is uh, as the month of solidarity with the Korean people is beginning soon in a few days. The Sinchon Museum is built at the place where the US imperialists had killed 35,383 people in cold blood. And this was during the period of the temporary strategic retreat in the DPRK from October 1950 to the end of the year. The US imperialists temporarily occupied the area and carried out many atrocities, and they were assisted by class enemies such as former landlords, former capitalists, former money lenders. These people joined forces with the US imperialists and helped them in the atrocities. The original Sinchon Museum was built in 1958 as not just a memorial, but as an anti-US education system. Since then, it has been expanded during the 1990s, and Marshal Kim Jong-un visited it in 2014 and gave directions that it should be rebuilt and greatly expanded. And what he did was to have the site of the museum moved from the town of Sinchon to the actual place where some of the worst massacres took place, notably the massacre of mothers and children. So a new Sinchon Museum was built there. I first visited it in 2000, the new museum in 2015, and also in 2017, at which time I actually made a short speech at the Sinchon Museum, which was quite something. Of course, I'd also visited the old Sinchon Museum a number of times, the first ever time being in 2002 and 2008, and also in 2013, where there was a mass anti-imperialist rally held at the Sinchon Museum. The new museum that was opened in 2015 had considerably upgraded methods of education and materials. There's use of audio-visual materials. There's very graphic displays. It's not a place for people of a nervous disposition to visit. It is very graphic. But I think this is necessary to expose the total barbarity and crimes of US imperialism. Yes, just looking at the comments from Captain DPRK. Yeah, believe you're referring to the South Korean puppets. Yes, they uh, do indeed pride themselves on not having worker rights, and in fact having the longest working hours in the world. And they recently even tried to lengthen the working day to 20 hours. This is true. You can actually look it up. South Korea wants to have a 20-hour working day. You know, it's total slavery. Right. While I wait for people to come up with some comments or questions, I'm just going to drop a link to the reading list that we have created for the month of solidarity. Yeah, I'll also take this opportunity to talk about the recent events that I went to in Berlin, Germany, that was organized by the European Regional Committee for Friendship with the Korean People, and it was hosted by KFA Germany. I'm very grateful to KFA Germany for their efforts in organising the actual physical parts of the event. It was a hybrid event consisting of an actual physical meeting as well as an online meeting. And KFA Germany did a splendid job in decorating the room, arranging the room, having food ordered for a reception afterwards. I mean, that was very, very good, and it showed a very high level of professionalism. Physically present, there were representatives from KFA Germany, from the Denmark DPRK Association, and myself from KFA UK, and the meeting attracted online participation. And I apologise if I miss any countries out, from Austria, Croatia, Poland, Finland, from KFA President Alejandro Caldebenos from Italy, and some other countries. So yeah, it was a very good meeting. It was arranged to mark the 60th anniversary of the start of work of the great leader, Comrade Kim Jong-il, at the Central Committee of the Workers' Party Korea, which of course is a very important anniversary in the DPRK because of the central leading and guiding role that the Workers' Party Korea plays in society. There will be another event on the 8th of July using a similar format of a physical meeting and an online meeting combined. It will also be in Berlin, and this is to mark the 30th anniversary of the demise, the passing away of the great leader, Comrade Kim Il-sung. So I hope you will stay tuned, to use an old-fashioned catchphrase, and look out for details of this event. And very usefully, someone has just put in the chat, are there any events coming? Well, as I said earlier, we've got an online meeting tomorrow. That's KFA UK and the British Group for the Study of the Juche idea. And on the 25th, we've got an anti-US rally online. It's an online rally at which we all denounce US imperialism, read out anti-US speeches. And on the 29th of June, there'll be a KFA UK picket of the Yankee Embassy. So I hope that answers the question about events. And yes, hello to comrades from the People's Korea Initiative of Poland. Well, if there's no more questions that people want to ask, I'll just say a few more words about my book, and maybe there'll be questions that come up. Otherwise, and then if nothing else comes up, I will close the live stream. So I'd like to talk about some of my books. I mean, this is the second and enlarged edition of The Great Conspiracy Against People's Korea, in which I detail the various attempts being made to overthrow Juche socialism, which go back a long way and are still continuing today. And it takes many forms, and I've detailed them in the book. You can buy it on lulu.com. and this one is simply about President Kim Il-sung and Chairman Kim Jong-il, called The Red Sons of Juche-based Socialism. And a report of the visit by our delegation in October 2019. And this was all about our visit to People's Korea in 2012, which I think is called, very appropriately called, Red Flag Flying High in Juche, Korea. And this book, Korea of Juche, which is a detailed analysis of the DPRK and its development and its policies. There's a section on foreign policy. And lastly, I mean, this was written some time ago, but it's called Behind the Mirror of Lies, and it's all about anti-DPR, some of the propaganda against the DPRK, but I mean, it's still worth a read. Right, and just seen a few questions on the chat. Yeah, the book by Alejandro, Korea, Songun Citadel, I don't think that's on lulu.com, but it's online and you can download copies of it. Are there any places where we can donate money to the DPRK? Well, there is a foundation called the Kim Il-sung Kim Jong-il International Foundation where you can donate money to the DPRK. You can also, I would mention, donate money to KFA UK through PayPal or through our coffee.com account, and you can also donate money to myself. With regard to buying Alejandro's book, I mean, I think he could ask him whether there's still copies, but I think it was a very limited print run. Right. Well, I'm going to close in about 2 or 3 minutes, unless there's any other questions arising. What year is Alejandro's book from? It's from 2009. Right. Well, there don't seem to be any more questions unless the internet is lagging, and I hope I haven't missed any questions. I mean, if you haven't had your question answered, please shout now, put a comment. This I'm going to close in a minute. I thank everybody for coming on to this live stream. I think it's been a very important live stream. I will be back in a few weeks with another live stream. Possibly might have other people joining me. So I wish everybody a good evening, and please continue to support People's Career with no ifs or buts. Long live People's Career, long live Juche, long live KFA UK. Goodbye.